Hello there. In this video today we're going to be talking about how to complete the general journal. In order to be able to do the general journal, it's important that you have an understanding of the basic accounting rules. Now I've just got these up here now. You can see in this little table we start with the account type. That means which category of account is it? And when I say category, what I mean is this a revenue, meaning that's income the business has earned. Expenses are the costs incurred in running the business on a day-to-day basis. Assets are the items of value that the business owns. Liabilities are going to represent amounts you owe to other people or other businesses. And owner's equity, shown as OE there, shows what the business is worth to the owner at any point in time. Nature then just means, is this listed on the debit side or the credit side of our business's records? And the debit side is the left side, the credit side is the right side. Now, when talking about the nature, if an account is increasing, so if you have more of that account, it's going to be the same as whatever its normal nature is. But if it's decreasing, it's going to be on the opposite side. The other rule to remember, and this should, hopefully you know all this already because there'll be videos to go along to explain each of these things in more detail, but this is just a quick refresher. Every single transaction you're looking at is going to affect at least two accounts, and of those, one will be debit and one will be credit at least. But remember, you might have more than two accounts involved, and if you do, the total of all the debit accounts added together will equal the total of all the credit accounts added together. So I'm going to open up Excel right now to create a template for our general journal. Now, when you're doing a general journal, it's very similar to a transaction analysis table, but it doesn't include quite as much working. So here I'm going to start with general journal of, and I'm going to go through some transactions as they appear in this first workbook here. So Ruby's Hairdressing Salon, that's the business I'm going to focus on for this. So I'm going to say general journal of Ruby's Hairdressing Salon. The very first column is going to be the date column. Now, as the name suggests, you just write the date that transaction has occurred on. I'm going to start with 2022 because that's the year that we're currently in, even though the question, if you actually look at it, it doesn't give us a year. We're going to assume that it's this year. The next column is going to be the particulars column. This is going to be our largest column. Automatically, Excel made my date column quite large, but I don't actually need it to be that big. Particulars, however, is going to be the main column. So I'm going to stretch that right out because it's going to contain a lot of information. Particulars is called account involved in the transaction analysis table. Now, particulars just means what's the specific account that's involved. And you need to put the actual account name in here, not the account type. A really common error I see is people will write the word asset there instead of a specific account like cash at bank or motor vehicle. You want to be as specific as possible when naming accounts, but keep in mind that sometimes you want to group like accounts together, so you don't have a pens account, a stapler account. Instead, you'd call that stationery. You don't have a chair account and a desk account and a couch account. Instead, you just have one called furniture. It's important, though, not to list the account type. You don't want a category in there. Then we have the post-ref column. This is where can I find the account in the ledger. Now, a general journal is going to list the accounts involved in each transaction and whether they're going to be recorded on the debit side or the credit side, whether this change that's come about as a result of this transaction, whether that's going to affect the debit account or the credit account. The debit or credit side of that account. So I'm going to have debit here and credit here. And I'm going to put a $sign and a $sign. Post-ref we won't fill in yet. We'll wait until we learn about how to do the ledger, and that's when you'll fill in the post-ref column, because it means where can I find the account we're looking at in the ledger. The specific account we've listed in the particulars column, where can I find that in the ledger? And for each account, we'll either have an amount in the debit column or the credit column, depending on whether that transaction is going to be recorded for that account on the debit side, meaning the left side, or the credit side, meaning the right side. At the end of every single transaction, you will end up with the debit side equaling the credit side. And in all the ones we're going to do today, I'm pretty sure, let me just have a look at the list, pretty sure to start off, simply, they're all going to be affecting only two accounts. One will be debit and one will be credit. Let's have a look now at the first transaction together. It says that on the 1st of January, Ruby contributed $50,000 cash to commence business. Now, because this is Ruby's hairdressing, I'm going to assume that she's the owner, and that's why they've said they've contributed cash. Now, whenever the owner puts money into the business, we call that capital. So the question I'm asking myself first when I see a transaction like this is, what are the accounts that are affected by this specific transaction? And if the owner has contributed money, there's two accounts involved. One is going to be the money, which we call cash at bank in accounting, and the other is going to be called capital. In the transaction analysis table, it does not matter what order you put them in, but for us, it actually does. When you're starting to record these in the general journal, you need to put the debit entry first. When I'm looking at this, I need to go back and remember my rules. Remembering my rules, looking here, the business, and remember everything is from the perspective of the business, not the owner. If the owner was to put money into the business has more money and the owner has less money. I'm doing the records from the perspective of the business because that's what the accounting entity assumption says. The business and the owner are separate. This needs to be in the business's perspective, so I have more cash. Cash, I think to myself, what type of account is that? Cash is an asset because it's an item of value that I own. Normally it's debit, and in this case it's increasing because I have more of it, and that means I'm going to be recording it on the debit side of my records, so this is going to be the first account that I'll list. The other thing, to stop me needing to flick backwards and forwards between these files, I'm just going to do a screenshot of these transactions and paste it in here, move it out of the way, so that I don't have to keep flicking backwards and forwards between each of the different files. Now, here I'm going to write the 1st of January, cash at bank, and leave the post-ref column blank for now. In the debit column, I'm going to write $50,000. The next entry I know automatically is going to need to be credit because there's only two accounts involved, so therefore one must be debit, one must be credit. The other thing I know is that capital, if I go back to my rules now, capital is an owner's equity account, and when the owner puts more money into the business, capital is increasing, so it's going to be credit. I knew that anyway. So now I write capital here. When you're dealing with the credit entry, just to make this stand out and be more obviously the credit entry, I'm going to indent this. Doing an indent in Excel involves this increase indent button. So I'm going to click that a few times to make it indented. And that's just required in all of the credit entries. And you might be asking, why bother indenting it when you can see it's credit because it's listed as the last transaction in here, and it's also in the credit column. The reason is, sure, it's obvious that it's credit when there's only two accounts involved, but if there was, say, 5 accounts involved, it can be tricky to tell which one's debit and credit, and the way our eyes read lines, it can be tricky to see across to see where the amount lines up with, and putting it indented just makes it a little bit more obvious that that's the account that's credited, meaning that's the account I'm going to record changes to on the right-hand side of my accounting records. The last step for analyzing a transaction in the general journal is to put in a narration. Narration is just a term that means explain what's actually gone on in this transaction. So I'm going to put this into brackets. Narrations are always put in brackets. And I'm explaining the transactions. What I mean by that is what happened in this transaction. And I'm going to say owner contributed cash to commence business. And then I'm going to say memo number 1. And I close the bracket. In Excel, if ever I want this cell to go across 2 lines, I can wrap the text so it will fit across 2. Or I could just increase the size of the cell like so. Now, there's a couple of more changes I want to make to this. Now, you might have multiple owners. This case only has 1, but you may end up with several owners. It's worth in here saying who the owner is. So for capital, and I should have done this to start with, I'm going to go R. Does it give us a last name for Ruby? It actually hasn't told us a last name. So at the moment, I'm just going to put in R. Smith. We'll just give her a, because obviously if you're the owner, you'll know what your last name is. So it's worth putting in the owner's name there because you may have multiple owners. The last step now is to put a red underline underneath the end of the transaction to show that this transaction is finished. When you're doing a general journal, the line to show the end of a transaction only goes through the particulars column. A quick way to get a line is to drop down here and choose a bottom border. We want a red color though. I'm going to change it to red just here. And to make it even more obvious, I'm going to make it a thick border as well. And now you can see that line really well. Just a few other formatting things. I'm going to make my headings bold. I'm going to merge and center that main heading up the top there. I may even want to change the color to make the headings stand out a little bit more as well, so I can see that those are my headings. And that sums up the end of the general journal. Just a few points to recap what we've done here now. It's important to remember that the particulars column is asking you what is the account that's involved in the transaction. There will be at least two. There could be more than two, but at least two of them. When you're listing the particulars column, you want to have the debit entry listed first, and you want to indent the credit entry. Post-ref we will fill in later, so don't worry about that column now. What the post-ref means is where can I find that account in the ledger, and what you'll end up doing is putting the number for Cash at Bank in there in the post-ref. Debit is the first one because it's a debit account, and you'll write in the amount that the account is, in this case, increasing by, and record it on the debit side. And the same with the next transaction will be filled in the credit side. At the end of the transaction, we will need all the debit side to equal the credit side. If there was two debits, say it was 20,000 and 30,000, then the credit entry would need to be 50,000. So the two debits would add up to equal the credit. At the end, you then want to explain the transaction in brackets, including a source document number. In here, I'm just going to say memo number. You want to have written proof that each transaction has taken place. I'm just fixing up this. Yep, and a red line underneath to show that that transaction has finished. Now that sums up the completion of how to do a general journal. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks everyone. Bye.